Today and tomorrow's interactive dialogues mark a critical step in the selection and appointment process for the next Secretary General, while also coming at a pivotal moment for the United Nations. The person we select will be more than the face of this institution. Our choice will send a powerful message about who we are and whether we truly serve all 8 billion people of the world in all their diversity. The multilateral system with the United Nations as its center is under unprecedented political and financial pressure. From a deepening liquidity crisis to fundamental principles of the UN Charter being put into question. The next Secretary General will be entrusted not only with navigating these challenges, but also with advancing essential reforms to ensure the United Nations is fit for the future. At the same time, the world needs the United Nations more than ever, and it needs a Secretary General who can provide strong, principled and effective leadership across all three pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. These interactive dialogues, which I convene in line with General Assembly Resolution 79/327, offer a unique opportunity for candidates to present their vision for the future of this organization and for you, member states and civil society, to ask questions and interact directly with candidates. The interactive dialogues are essential to ensuring a transparent and inclusive selection and appointment process, while underlining the important role of the General Assembly. I encourage each of you to make full use of this opportunity, and I thank all candidates for their active participation, member states and civil society for their questions and engagement. But these dialogues do not end in this chamber. They are also an opportunity for people around the world, the very people that the United Nations serves, to listen, to engage, and to hold this process to the highest standards. For this decision does not only concern a few, but all of us in and outside the United Nations, who look to this institution to reflect the principles and values it champions. While we will hear the candidates individually, starting today in interactive dialogues, a town hall format will follow later in the process. As reflected in my letters dated March 4th and April 15th, 2026, the dialogue will begin with an introduction by the candidate of their vision and priorities for up to 10 minutes, followed by an interactive exchange. Each interactive dialogue will last up to 3 hours. The interactive exchange will take place in 2 segments. We will begin with a 1.5-hour discussion focused on leadership skills, abilities, experience, and the need to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. Following this, we will move into the second segment, which will focus on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. In line with revitalization resolutions, civil society representatives will be invited to pose questions in each of the 2 thematic segments. Before proceeding to hear the presentation of the vision of the candidate, I would like to inform members on how to inscribe to speak in the 2 thematic segments. Delegations wishing to speak can register their wish to speak by pressing the microphone button. Delegations are asked to do so at the beginning of each of the 2 segments, as announced in my letter. Please do not press the microphone button yet, so you will not be on the list. I will announce when delegation will be asked to press the microphone button at the beginning of each segment. Member states speaking on behalf of groups are invited to approach the list of speakers table and will be given priority. After the conclusion of the first segment, delegations will be again invited to press the microphone button to signify their desire to speak in the second segment. Delegations can speak only once in each segment, whether on behalf of a group or in national capacity. In the second segment, priority will be given to delegations that did not have an opportunity to speak during the first segment. I now invite Ms. Bachelet to present her vision. Please, the floor is yours.
Madame la Présidente, Excellencies, chers amis, good morning, Sao Shanghai, Zdravstvuyte, bonjour, assalamu alaikum, bon dia.
I have the honor of appearing before you today as the candidate nominated by Brazil and Mexico to the post of Secretary General. I am deeply moved by the confidence that they have placed in me at this moment of danger and of hope. And I wish all delegations to know that I thank each of them for this opportunity to share a message of renewed hope in the future of the United Nations.
I believe it is my obligation to seek to answer your questions and listen to you today. But before doing so, allow me to share with you my key message: the urgent need for hope. Our world and the order based on international law that sustains it is under strain as never before. My story is but one among millions that bear witness to what happens when law-based order falters. The day of the 1973 coup d'etat in my country, my father, an honorable member of the Chilean Air Force, who deeply believed in the rule of law, suffered the consequences when those in power turned against it. Yet it was international pressure and global solidarity that helped restore peace and democracy to my homeland. At a time when we desperately needed hope, the world provided it. Decades later, the people of Chile granted me the honor of leading our nation. And with profound commitment, I now bring the experience of my country, not unlike that of others, to this organization to lead with hope once again. I was elected twice as President of the Republic, the first woman in this position. I served twice as Cabinet Minister in Health and in Defense, as the first Executive Director of UN Women, and as High Commissioner for Human Rights. In almost 20 years of public life, both national and international, I have paired the defense of human principles with realistic, practical leadership. Peace and development demand this balance. Trust in the international order and trust in our institutions are mutually reinforcing. Both require robust experience and a firm commitment to the UN Charter. I stand before you to reclaim the urgent need for dialogue, because deliberation and multilateral cooperation have been the operative platform upon which this organization was built, and they remain the bridge to our future. My own vision was born of the difficult and sometimes improbable miracle of dialogue, even when all odds are against it. I know it can deliver, because I have seen it transform the impossible into achievable. We must all remember Article 33 of the Charter, which mandates solutions through negotiation, inquiry, mediation, and conciliation. Today, I solemnly commit to upholding this mandate of dialogue in all my actions. I also commit to consistent and full adherence to the Charter, the best assurance all member states can have of impartiality, and the necessary foundation of trust. We need a modern UN, focused on real, sustainable, and verifiable results, leading through managerial efficiency, coherence, and trustworthy leadership. I envision a United Nations that anticipates, prevents, creates, and unites with one overarching goal: serve member states and their citizens.
This organization and its complex system remains the most ambitious, generous, and successful collective project by states in history, from civil aviation to humanitarian assistance, from intellectual property to monetary stability, from peacekeeping to meteorology. The UN system is woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. This is where the inspiration for and the cause of our urgent hope lies, that hope that will allow us to unleash the full potential of multilateral cooperation and to unite the peoples of the world around common solutions.
Let's act in an environment of deep uncertainty, strategic competition, expanded armed conflicts, grave violations of international law and human rights, deepening inequality, disastrous climate change, and technological disruption. Trust in institutions have been severely weakened. And yet, precisely because the stakes are this high, the raw material for transformation has never been more abundant. Fractures expose the architecture that needs redesigning. Disruption forces the imagination that incremental progress never demands. It is not that difficulty carries a silver lining. It is that difficulty is the only forge in which durable solutions are made. So this is the moment that called for exactly the kind of leadership this organization was built to provide. And it is this conviction that animates my candidacy. The United Nations remain the one place on earth where every nation, large or small, powerful or vulnerable, can speak to every other nation. The only house where all bases share the same roof. That irreplaceable architecture of universal dialogue is what we must protect and what we must put to work. A shared vision for a renewed UN must look in 4 directions. Look backwards. We must remain firmly true to the Charter, its purposes and its principles. They are and must remain our common moral and political compass. Renewal and reform must always serve a fuller realization of that founding vision. Look inward. The UN system must commit to transparency, accountability, efficiency, and effectiveness, and align eliminating duplications, streamlining processes, and aligning resources with mandates. The UN 80 initiative is a unique opportunity to strengthen the organization, and I will pursue it with full determination. Look outward. We must reconnect with the peoples of the world. Restoring credibility requires delivering results, effective results, supporting peace and security, advancing sustainable development, and defending human rights efficiently and impartially. Look forward. The UN must build its future on institutional excellence, effective service to the people, and strong loyalty to its purposes and principles. Shaping our collective future, and above all, that of the young people who will inherit whatever we build or fail to build here. The centennial of 2045 is not a distant milestone. It is a working horizon that gives urgency to every reform we undertake today. On peace and security, the priority must be prevention, quiet diplomacy, early warning, sustained engagement with regional actors, and professional mediation can stop escalation before it becomes a catastrophe. The Secretary General must remain engaged as a channel of communication even when consensus seems distant. On sustainable development, key priorities are eliminating hunger and poverty, reducing inequality, closing the digital gap, and advancing meaningful climate action, leaving younger generations a world capable of offering opportunities, jobs, dignity, and hope. On human rights, human dignity must remain at the center of UN action. Human rights are not only the core of a dignified life, they are also preventive tools for lasting peace and global stability. Excellencies, I accepted my nomination to join the millions who desperately need us to hear the urgent call for hope, a hope for dialogue, a hope for inspiration, a determined and passionate hope for igniting faith in United Nations leadership for this turbulent time. Let me remind you of Nelson Mandela's final address to the United Nations, delivered in this very building, where he urged for what he called a workable dream, a hope that leaders would emerge who would not allow that any person should be denied their freedom. It is in this spirit of service that I humbly answer Mandela's call, offering my experience to lead this organization through this unprecedented moment for a more inclusive world. Violeta Parra, legendary folk singer of my homeland, once sang that the 2 materials that forge her art were, and I will quote, "Your song, which is also mine, and the song of all, which is my very own," end of quote. It is a dream that finds its voice in the mouths of others, becoming a word and ultimately a shared song. We must not surrender to despair. Just the opposite. We must choose to hope, repair, anticipate, and above all have the courage to cooperate so the world can prosper again, live in peace, and ensure everyone's human dignity. This is my vision for the renewed future of the United Nations that we bring before you today. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Bachelet. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegations wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Interventions should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. Time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoff. A timer will be projected on screen. To assist speakers to observe the time limit, their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before the time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes as well. I will remind candidates of their time limits. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay, speaking on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, followed by the European Union and Kyrgyzstan.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President Michelle Bachelet.
Attaches great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirms the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. First, with reference to the UNIT initiative introduced by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal and how do you believe it could advance a United Nations that is more effective, efficient, and delivers greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reforms fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the United Nations, preserve the balance among its 3 pillars, and do not come at the expense of development mandates or other priorities of developing countries? Second, with the 2030 deadline fast approaching, how would you ensure the full and timely implementation of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, bearing in mind the universality and indivisibility of the goals and targets, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and the commitment to leave no one behind? Specifically, how do you envisage the role of the Secretary General and the UN Secretariat in advancing this objective? 3. If you were appointed as Secretary General, how would you ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geographical balance as prescribed by Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation of unrepresented and underrepresented countries, especially from developing countries, at the senior level appointments within the UN Secretariat and the broader UN system? 4. At a time of shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the United Nations system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support financing for development in a manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries? Fifth, in light of the organization's persistent liquidity crisis, including warnings of a potential race to bankruptcy, what concrete measures would you, as Secretary General, undertake to promote compliance with Member States' financial obligations, ensuring that assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions? Finally, the Group of 77 and China underscores the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat while ensuring that it provides equitable and effective support to all Member State representations in the discharge of their responsibilities. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the group of 77 and China. Ms. Bachelet, you have the opportunity to answer.
Well, thank you very much, the G77 plus China group, for your questions. I'll try in 2 minutes to answer whatever I can. For me, the UN aid is essential. I think it's a must, because what we do need is an organization that can be relevant, that can be efficient, that can be also transparent, and so on. So that's why I think that reducing duplication, that we need the three things: the operational efficiency, mandate rationalization, and structural coherence. And I think we need to also take into consideration that any reform should preserve the balance among the three pillars. Reduce duplication through common services, greater digital interoperability, an interdepartmental team, not through cuts that eliminate field capacity. So we need to do whatever they need, but we need to preserve field capacity. We also need to protect the resident coordinator system, analytical capacity, early warning, and humanitarian presence from budget-driven erosion. We also need to ensure that UN80 is an intergovernmental process, reform-driven and owned by member states, not imposed administratively. Assert clearly and publicly that assessed contributions are legal charter obligations. They're not voluntary transfer. And also promote, I would say, a more balanced financing model, reduce the excessive dependence on earmark, because that makes a lot of fragmentation inside the system. And we also have to create a systemic culture of independent, real-time evaluation and full transparency linked to management decisions, to resource allocation, and to leadership performance. And in terms of the Agenda 2030, if I have a couple of seconds, I say that we need to reinvigorate the UN development system by empowering resident coordinators with real authority, adequate resources, but also clear accountability for results at country level. I believe that we need to ensure that also we need to see which countries are farthest in the possibility of achieving the SDGs. And we need to think on the metrics beyond GDP, because multidimensional vulnerability indices that capture mirror what is actually happening. And finally, I have to identify and systematically address SDGs bottlenecks: poverty, hunger, climate, social protection, gender equality, and state capacity.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states, followed by Kyrgyzstan and Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President, and a warm welcome from the EU and its member states, Ms. Bachelet. As leading political, financial, and operational supporters of the UN and multilateralism, the European Union and its member states are deeply invested in the UN Charter, international law, and the UN's success on the ground. We fully expect to be working closely with the Secretary General, who fully shares these values and principles, who manages to match principle with action, and who has a clear appreciation of the European Union's role in the UN system. At this critical juncture, the United Nations needs a Secretary General who can build trust, accelerate UN reforms, and deliver solutions that make a real difference in people's lives on the ground. It needs a Secretary General that is fully prepared to defend and promote with equal vigor all three UN pillars and full respect for the UN Charter and international law. The European Union and its member states support all strands of the UN's work equally. On peace and security, we actively advance the implementation of key UN mandates towards security and defense missions around the world. On sustainable development, we provide close to 50% of all official development assistance and over 1/3 of all voluntary contributions to the UN system to support development and equality. On human rights, we remain firmly committed to their universality and indivisibility, while noting with concern that only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates at a time that human rights are increasingly attacked. I mention all this to highlight the fact that through our work on the ground, we are fully aware of both of the successes of the United Nations, but also of the dire need in a number of areas for reform that protects all three pillars, but also makes them more effective. So, a question to you is the following. How will you ensure the continuity of the ongoing UN80 initiative? If you could reform one thing during your first 100 days in office to make the UN more effective in delivering on any of its core mandates, what would that be? And can you offer an example of a major reform that you promoted successfully in your previous tenures? And what lessons did you learn that could inform your approach to broader UN reform today? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union, speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Thank you very much for this question and all the context that has been mentioned. Yeah, well, I do believe, I personally believe very strongly that the three pillars are so intertwined. I know we're going to discuss about the programming issue later, but I want to say this because for me it would be very important, because I believe there will not be peace, no peace without development and without human rights. So that means that if I'm selected Secretary General, I will give my biggest efforts. I will strive to ensure that three pillars can get enough support in terms of financing, in terms of political support, and in the sense that what would be the big or the one thing I could do at the beginning. I believe there are some of these issues that depend on member states, and probably one of the most important will be on what is going to be done on mandates, because it's also very important in terms of how the UN will continue developing. And for me, because on all the things that us as candidates will promise, one of the things that will be really important to have since the beginning is our mechanism of follow-up, of, if I would say, accountability, on ensuring that also independent evaluation and assessment of what is being done in terms of the reform. Because usually people, from when they get in love with something, if I may say, they tend not to be very self-critical. And I think we need, particularly when we are trying to think how we make the UN more relevant, more efficient, more transparent, but also to save certain costs that are probably better done in another way, and use that savings for exactly human rights or development or peace and security. So I believe that the essential thing would be to ensure that all the mechanism, all the work that we will do with the different agencies, with the Secretariat, will really be follow up, and not just give an instruction that maybe it's follow or not, but to be sure to make a very strong follow-up that every decision of the General Assembly and, of course, the decisions that are in the competence of the Secretary General will be decisions that will be fulfilled and achieved.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan on behalf of the landlocked developing countries, followed by Egypt and the first speaker of the civil society.
Madam President, Madam Bachelet, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of landlocked developing countries. Landlocked developing countries, or LLDCs, represent 32 nations and over 500 million people. Their defining challenges is geographic. Without direct access to the sea, they depend on transit through neighboring countries. This results in higher trade costs, longer delays, and greater vulnerability to external shocks. We welcome the convening of this interactive dialogue, which provides an important opportunity to engage with candidates for the position of the Secretary General at a critical time for the multilateral system. For landlocked developing countries, structural constraints linked to geography continue to shape development pathways. The adoption of the Avaza Program of Action reflects a renewal global commitment to addressing these unique challenges in a comprehensive and coordinated manner. Its success, however, will depend on effective implementation and strong system-wide coherence. We would appreciate your views on how to strengthen system-wide coherence so that global commitments translate into the measurable progress at the regional and country levels, including through enhanced engagement of the United Nations resident coordinators and country teams, and the effective integration of LLDC priorities into UN Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks. Furthermore, we would like to it will be interesting to hear from you how you envisage strengthening the capacity, resources, and institutional role of the Office of the High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, so that it can effectively fulfill its mandate's functions, particularly in supporting coordinated follow-up, mobilizing international support, enhancing advocacy, and assisting LLDC in the implementation, monitoring, and review of the program of action at all levels, including with the involvement and support of the United Nations resident coordinators and country teams. In conclusion, the group of landlocked developing countries looks forward to hearing concrete and actionable proposals on how to ensure effective implementation of the program of action and to advance the development prospects of LLDC in a meaningful and sustainable manner. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan on behalf of the landlocked developing countries, please.
I thank the representative of the LDC's countries. And you're right, geography must not determine destiny. But it is the possibility that the multilateral system exists precisely to correct the accidents of geography and history. And I will hold to that promise. I know that all the particular situations that LLDC countries had to confront in terms of being able to develop, to fulfill their capacities and to be able to improve people's life. And I would say that I intend to this transform it not in a rhetoric phrase, but into concrete and instrumental implementations with resources, with review graduation transitions, also to prevent abrupt losses of concessional access, because many times countries, when you just look at that GDP, they lose all the possibilities of concessional support. The other thing is, I believe that we need to strengthen particularly the resident coordinator system, because one of the things we need to make this not only a beautiful speech, but a reality, is that the UN system, at the country level, work with the national priorities and support those national situations that can really help those countries thrive. Of course, we have the AWASA program, but also I think I would champion also the Almaty program, addressing connectivity, logistics, and climate vulnerability barriers. And I will say that, of course, you mentioned also the SIDS, the LDCs, and others, and I truly believe, because that also is important, as I mentioned, I think, before in another question, I'm talking about Agenda 2030 of the SDGs, that when we look at the need to reform these financial institutions, we also need to look at if the way the metrics being used for countries who had a very particular vulnerability is the metric that should be used. And I think that we need to, being the President of the Republic, I have to say, with Uruguay and Barbuda and Antigua at the time, we pushed for the OECD to change the criteria, that people should not be graduated according only to their GDP, but also to their vulnerability situation. And I truly believe this is something that the international community and the international financial institutions need to take into consideration. Because if we don't change the way the financial institutions are working, those countries will never have all the support they need. So I will fight in all different levels to support the situation of countries that are more vulnerable than others because of either geographical conditionation, or because they're small states, or because they're small islands, or because they're least developed countries.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of the Arab group, followed by the civil society Girl Up.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. Our group remains ready to cooperate constructively with all candidates in order to strengthen the role of the United Nations and enhance its abilities to face current international challenges, as well as strengthening the principle of the Charter and maintain international peace and security and sustainable development. Our group would like to ask the two following questions. Madam Bachelet, how do you envisage your role, if in office, regarding enhancing the efficiency of the UN system and its integrated efforts regarding the Palestinian question, which, in order to implement relevant international resolutions and restore or allow for peace in the region? Second, regarding the growing conflicts in the world and challenges pertaining to respect of international law and the UN Charter, how do you envisage ways to strengthen respect for these rules, especially when it comes to the humanitarian aspect, and allowing at the same time to strengthen the role of UN organs, namely UNRWA, so that these agencies can play their mandate fully? Or rather implement their mandate fully. Second, regarding the current, or in light of the current crisis at the United Nations and resources allowed for development, as well as the growing debt burden, how will you enhance the role of the United Nations in supporting the fact that member states will honor their financial commitments towards the United Nations? And what are the means that you will use in this regard?
I would like to ask the following question. There is a sense that the international legal order is in crisis, and the fundamental rules of international law, like sovereignty, non-intervention, the non-use of force, and freedom of navigation, are being challenged. Is there a role for the incoming SG to reaffirm the commitment to the international legal order, to ensure enforcement of international law? وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of the Arab Group, Ms. Bachelet.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for these questions. I would say, first of all, my personal involvement. I do believe that the next Secretary General has to be somebody who is really present. First of all, should be prevent conflict from happening, but should also be, if I would say, and very even physically present in the field, in the places where we need solutions to problems and where there are resolutions of the General Assembly, in terms of being sure that, and making sure that they are implemented, they're a reality, and not only a resolution that could be kept somewhere and not being a reality for the country. So that is something that for me is really important, to ensure my personal commitment and my personal, I would say, to use, if I would say, what the Secretary General of the UN has. It's true that you mentioned that there's a lot of questioning of things that in the past were supposed to be, they were taken for granted in terms of the world order. But I think that having been true, that's true, the Secretary General is somebody who has the moral voice, who has also a diplomatic stature that can be heard by and received by powerful and not so powerful countries, that has the possibility of being there with their leadership and try to make a difference and trying to ensure the possibility of everyone. And so I would say I would always have full political support to the system. That is some way that I believe that things that are not really many times going well can go better. and in the sense that as well, for me, humanitarian access in places where there have been crises, and the ones you mentioned, is one of the things we need to protect and prevent from being hollowed out. One of the problems that I see, even though I completely agree on the UN80, is that what we need to ensure that it will not hollow out issues that are really important to happen. And one of those is that organizations like UNRWA and others who are doing a great humanitarian assistance can having the resources, the political support, and also the capacity to do the job we have entitled them to do. In terms of the global order, well, one of the things that I know that this is something that is not only the task of the Secretary General. Member states have a very important role to play. But I'm still a believer that multilateralism is essential, and it's essential more than ever. And that we need to put our voices together. And that's what I make my first intervention. I was speaking about dialogue to inspire hope, because I do believe that multilateralism is that what this building and this place represents is the only way to deal with the challenges that we have in front of us. I know that there's a lot of trends that goes in other direction in different areas. You mentioned some of them. But I truly believe that the SG has to speak out, has to convince member states and the parties, try to show why to have a rules-based order where everybody feels protected, represented, is not only the just thing to do, but the smart thing to do if we want a peaceful and better world for everyone.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the First Civil Society. We will hear a pre-recorded video by Girl Up.
Hello, my name is Pachacanchai and I Sabe Crespo. In my work as a Girl Up youth leader promoting public accountability in Ecuador, I am aware that heads of institutions such as the Secretary General operate in environments where political constraints may limit action. What is one decision you have taken in your career where you prioritize impact over political expedience? And how will that shape your leadership if elected?
Please.
Well, what you ask is the history of my life. I have never thought that I should have to make decisions that could be, that will make me stay in some place if that doesn't have an impact. I truly believe that what the world needs is somebody who is not fighting for the post, but is fighting for the principles, the values, and for a better world for everyone. And particularly, is what I always done. And if I'm selected Secretary General, I will have the same attitude and the same, if I would say, conduct, because I have had the honor to be in so many issues that the only reason to try to be a candidate for SG in a world that is not easy, you can agree with me on this, is because I really believe that if you are a Secretary General, it has to be worthy for the people of the world.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, followed by the Solomon Islands and the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning, colleagues. First of all, thank you, Madam Bachelet, for the presentation of your vision this morning and for your commitment to participation in this process. I have, as mentioned, the honor to ask 2 questions on behalf of the ACT group, which is a cross-regional group comprised of 27 small and mid-sized countries committed to a transparent and accountable UN and seeking to improve the working methods of the Security Council and its relationship with the General Assembly. First question. The General Assembly has a joint role in the selection and appointment process for the next Secretary-General. In its resolutions, it has underlined the importance for candidates to embody the highest standards of efficiency, competence, and integrity. The Civil Society Coalition 148 Billion has also published a set of 5 principles for integrity for Secretary-General campaigns that has specific actions towards transparency, accountability, engagement, and independence in the campaign. 148 Billion have written to and asked all the candidates to commit to these principles. Are you willing to do so? And if not, why? The second question is about your leadership in conflict prevention. What specific early warning indicators will trigger your personal intervention in an emerging conflict? And thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway, speaking on behalf of the ACT Group.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam. I would say that the principles put forward by 148 Billion reflect the same standards of transparency, independency, and I would say accountability that I believe most guide both the selection process and the conduct of the Secretary General's office. And I believe it's the same issue that the General Assembly is asking for. I do believe that civil society plays a really important role in holding both candidates and the organizations accountable. And their voice in this process, I believe, is legitimate. And the principles for integrity are consistent with what the General Assembly itself has called for. But I would go further and said that this principle should not end with the campaign. A Secretary General who commits to them during candidacy but abandons them once in office would undermine exactly the trust that the organization needs to rebuild. So if I am selected, I would carry this commitment into the office itself. The second question you are asking me, it's about, well, as I mentioned, and I've been speaking about it in many places, I have considered that one of the most important things of the Secretary General is to prevent things from happening. We know that prevention is really important in terms not only that you save lives, you know, but also it's important in terms, even in terms of what it means to have to go into a peacekeeping operation because you were not able to prevent. And there's a lot of things we all know, and the Charter explains which are the main mechanisms that the Secretary General and, of course, also the United Nations can use in terms of early warning system, in terms of mediation, of good offices, et cetera, et cetera. And I truly believe that we have a deficit on early warning signs. And in terms of the capacity of the system to read, if I may say, those early warning signs. And I've mentioned in some meetings that I've been in countries where I could feel, I don't know if English sounds well, but I had the nose that something was happening. I could tell that there would be a coup d'etat. And I asked the country team, and I asked the National Commission of Human Rights, and I asked everybody told me, are you crazy? No way. 3 weeks later, there was a coup d'etat in that country. So I always was, being High Commissioner, I was insistent that we need, as UN, to have more capacity on identifying. And let me mention just some. First of all, I think the possibility of, when, you know, peace agreements are ended. I mean, there's no possibility to continue doing political disruptions. When you see, for example, human rights violation like forced killing, enforced disappearance, or hate speech against certain communities. Also, when you see that the defense issues, the security forces, for example, start doing things that are not the normal ones, that they employ people where they shouldn't, that they get more militarized and so on. Or when, for example, the justice system does not, remains, if I would say, it's not operating, it's not working for people's rights and to ensuring justice. So that doesn't mean that you have to add A, B, C, D, and then I will go there. But because you have to analyze it because of the context, the history, and so on. but with many of those and others, and I hope to, if I'm selected, to really be able to do a lot of development of the resident coordinator system on others to read what's going on in the country, and I will be there every time it's needed.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum, followed by the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Singapore.
I have the honor to address you today on behalf of the members of the Pacific Islands Forum represented with a presence in New York. We thank the President of the General Assembly for this valuable opportunity to engage directly with the candidates for the Secretary General. The Pacific region faces many challenges, some shared by members across the Assembly, others unique to our region. But no challenge is more pressing than climate change, which will disproportionately imperil lives, livelihoods, security, and the well-being of Pacific people. Secretary General Guterres' visits to our region helped him to appreciate the gravity of this threat and to mobilize international attention. It also allowed him to appreciate the region's leadership and to hear firsthand from our communities on the work they are doing to bolster resilience. During his visit to Tonga for the Pacific Islands Leaders Summit in 2024, Secretary General described the Pacific region as a beacon of solidarity and strength, environmental stewardship and peace. The Pacific and the UN have had a long history of collaboration, and we want to ensure that this partnership continues and is prioritized under UN's new leadership. We have two questions for all candidates. First, how would you use the Office of the Secretary General to draw attention and mobilize action to address the unique vulnerabilities of small island developing states, including Pacific SIDS, in particular the impacts of climate change? Second, the UN is often pulled towards crises that dominate headlines. As realities unfold more slowly with irreversible consequences, how will you balance urgent conflicts with existential threats such as impacts of climate change? What criteria will guide your decision where attention and political capital will be directed to? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands. Please, Ms. Bachelet.
Well, I think that for the Pacific Island, but also for the Caribbean and SIDS, for low-lying nations as well, climate change is not a policy debate. It's a question of survival, and I will never treat it as anything else. I think that it can be used, the full moral authority of the Secretary General Office to sustain urgency around the 1.5 goal in every multilateral forum, bilateral heads of states engagement, but also public communications. I think the Secretary General has a voice that can be heard. We also believe that we must support the most ambitious interpretation of the Paris Agreement. I signed the Paris Agreement as President of the Republic, and I truly believe we need to continue working strongly on that, and all the reviews and impulse mechanism connecting the IPCC's finding to political accountability. I also believe that we need to establish, in collaboration with the UNFCCC bodies, multilateral development banks, governments and civil society, a transparent, publicly accessible tracking system for climate finance commitments, what was delivered, in what form, and to which countries. I also think that we need to champion grant-based rather than loan-based climate finance for the most vulnerable countries, because I think we need to reject the injustice of requiring in-depth nations to borrow to adapt to climate impacts they didn't produce, they didn't cause. I also think that we need to support the Lost and Damaged Fund as a recognition of the principle of climate justice and advocate for adequate capitalization commensurate with the scale of the need. I also believe what the Secretary General should use every relevant bilateral and multilateral engagement to raise climate finance delivery at a standing political priority. So I would say climate change, but we used to talk in the UN before, like the triple planetary crisis, climate change, pollution, and also loss of biodiversity, because they're all very intertwined, has been for many years one of my oceans and how we protect marine areas has been one of my important issues that I've been dealing with for many years. So I would ask Secretary General, if selected, I will work very strongly with SEEDS and Pacific Island and all the countries that are going through this to this existential development that is climate change. And of course, in the case of SEEDS, translate the Antigua and Barbuda agenda into real financing reform, incorporating, as I said before, vulnerability into all access criteria. And I will insist in all the multilateral places and all the bilateral places that climate change should not be something that is forgotten, because it is, I would say, the biggest threat to humanity.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux countries, followed by Singapore and the next civil society organization, 148 billion.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I align with the statement of the European Union. And I thank Ms. Bachelet for sharing her vision and her long-standing commitment to human rights. We particularly value your emphasis on prevention, accountability, and the centrality of human rights across all pillars of the UN. We see strong resonance with our belief that the Secretary-General must serve as a guardian of the UN Charter and international law, and as a voice of moral authority, especially in times of increasing geopolitical tension. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary-General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary-General who can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, act as a strong convening power across all three pillars, and who can proactively contribute to prevention, peace-building, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence. We would be interested to hear more about how you would approach modernizing UN management systems and financing, ensuring greater transparency, efficiency, and coherence across the system, particularly in the light of the ongoing discussions on UN 80. And finally, could you share your early thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including Deputy Secretary General? How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities and the good functioning of the UN? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux countries. Please, Ms. Bachelet.
Well, some of the things I already mentioned, I believe, is that one of the things that the next Secretary General has to do is to try to build trust within the United Nations, among countries, and my intention is to speak with all member states, with the PRs, to come to the General Assembly every time I'm invited, of course, to inform of the different things that the Secretary General is doing on different areas that are on the competence of the Secretary General, but also to analyze which could be not only in terms of what we need to do on the UN 80, in terms of what I already mentioned, improving efficiency, managerial situations, and avoid duplication, and so on, and fragmentation. But also, of course, we need to do much more in terms of how we finance the system. And in that sense, I do believe that I will need to speak, and also, if I am selected, I will need to speak that before I come to office, because I've heard that the Secretariat will not have much money when it starts next year, to ask for member states to do what they have to do. The assessed contributions are not voluntary. they are by the charter. It's a legal commitment. So member states have to do it, but also do it in the moment it's needed, because if countries pay their assessed contributions in December, it's very difficult that they will be able to be used during the year that is finishing. So, but I think I will use my best offices, good offices in this regard as well, to try to talk to them why it's so important, so the UN can really do the mandates that we have, being in peace and security, being in development, and also being on the human rights area. Well, human rights, you know, has only 4% of the budget, of the regular budget, so it's not much, but still we need to preserve it, because we need also to be in the middle of all what we do in the UN. In terms of, and of course there's many things, and also if you think on financing for development, that will be something probably we'll speak later on during the session, but there are a lot of different mechanisms that have been identified in many UN conferences that I think we should push for them to become a reality. In terms of the composition of my group, I wouldn't be able to tell you the names of the person. I will give you the criteria. The criteria for me is that what the Charter asks us to do. The Charter says that the Secretary General has to choose. First of all, I have to say nobody can by himself have all the answers to everything, and you need a good team that is committed, that really understands, and that feels that the only way we go through is if we work together and we push in the same direction as Secretariat, but with member states as well. The second thing that I would say is that, of course, there is a need of improving representation, geographical representation, and of course, gender parity. Secretary General Guterres have done a lot in terms of gender parity at certain levels, and I think that needs to continue as Secretariat. And there's a lot of countries who feel unrepresented or underrepresented. And I will be particularly active in looking for having candidates that will apply to different posts that really are part of these countries who do not feel represented. How can somebody trust the UN if the UN does not represent the world inside its own Secretariat? So for me, this is an essential task that I will achieve.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group, followed by the civil society organization, and then Kenya.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and a warm welcome to Madam Bachelet. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. Madam Bachelet, we are living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations, characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. For small states, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option, but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role, not only in defending the UN Charter, but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the United Nations. We look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, especially the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right, where international law and sovereignty and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the SSG stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. In the interest of brevity, please allow me to go directly to the questions now. First, what steps will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Security Council has been unable to take decisive action? And specifically, Madam Bachelet, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Second, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future are landmark outcome documents which provide a roadmap for global action and partnership. How will you accelerate the implementation of the SDGs and the pact for the future. Thirdly, we are at a critical moment when public perception of the United Nations seems to have become critical and even cynical in many countries. How do you plan to galvanize support for the work of the UN, especially among younger people who represent the future in all our societies? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore speaking on behalf of the Small States Group. Please, Ms. Bachelet.
Well, I believe the Pact of the Future has a really important role in terms of ensuring that we can be successful to accelerate the Agenda 2030 and the achievement of the DSGs. And I will do my best in terms of organizing the part of that is in my competence, that could be in my competence, that would be how we organize the internal system in terms of the resident coordinator system, in terms that they work with every, this is a universal political and moral compass, the Agenda 2030 and the Pact of the Future. But every country does not have the same obstacles and the same problems to be able to solve their shortcomings. So I believe this needs to be done. I need to push for it has to be work at the local level, at the country level, where the UN community system will work with the countries for the national priorities and look at what are the bottlenecks they have in each particular issue to see how the UN system can be really, really helpful in supporting with good strategies to build capacity in case that's needed and to put the money where is also needed. I think that is something that we need to do in terms of really making this a reality. And the second thing that I would say is that I'm trying to... I'm trying to understand what I wrote down. Sorry, just a second. And the last one? Yes. But, huh? Sí. No, pero el tercero, sí. And I was trying to identify the third one. And I think in terms of the office of the PGA, I believe they should have appropriate funding, recognized also as the voice of the most universal and democratic organ, and work closely with the PGA. That would be my main issues. And the third was...
Strengthen the role of the General Assembly.
No, that's already I answered. No, the last one was... Oh, sorry, but... Oh, yeah. About youth. And no, it was more than youth. It was what are you going to do so the world trusts the United Nations? Particularly youth, but also trust. What I believe is that the only way to rebuild trust in the United Nations as a system, first of all, is to be able to deliver results. If people in the world sees that the United Nations is dealing with the most delicate situations and having results, having trust, support people that are with hunger, support people that are living under terrible conditions, support and play the biggest possible role, that's Secretary General, but the whole UN system, in the solution of conflicts. That's the only way that the world will believe that the United Nations is a meaningful organization, but also young people who will have hope that the world can be better also for them.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the next civil society organization, 148 billion, followed by Kenya and Germany.
Thank you. Aditi Gorur with the 148 billion campaign. During Secretary General campaigns, candidates face considerable pressure from powerful member states, especially on the allocation of senior UN jobs. This violates the UN Charter, as well as multiple GA resolutions, and it's resulted in certain countries enjoying a monopoly on top UN roles for their nationals. We believe that the next Secretary General should have the freedom to build the best possible team from a diverse global talent pool. If appointed, what steps will you take to ensure that there are no longer national monopolies on top UN jobs? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the civil society organization 148 billion, Ms. Bachelet.
Well, I think the main step that you can have is to have the conviction, as I said before, that you need the senior post, being it from CB, from special envoys, from different organs depending of the Secretary General, but also inside the Secretariat in terms of senior post, that they will really represent the world. And I believe that should be like that. And I have to say, it's sometimes not easy. Sometimes it will mean a political cost. But if you are convinced that you want the world to see the UN as really as representative of the diversity of countries that we have, of the diversity of situations that are not the same when you are dealing with different challenges, being it peace and security, being in development with human rights, or being in the possibility of a small state to be able to thrive. I think you need to have people in charge that will really be able to represent those perspectives and to ensure that the Secretary General never forgets and also plays a role that no one at the UN forgets those situations and can play an important role in trying to improve the conditions of all of those countries. And in that sense, I have to say, being a President of the Republic my first time, it was a story in my country as well, where there were certain ministries that were like for certain parties. And I thought that was not a good idea. I think you need always rotation. First, representation of the diversity, geographical, gender parity, but also representation. And so what I'm saying, I'm not afraid of doing that. I've done it in the past, and I will do it if it's necessary, because it is necessary in the UN. That's my conviction and my commitment.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya on behalf of the UNAID Global Group, followed by Germany and Uganda.
Thank you, Madam President. I will ask the following question on behalf of the UNAID Global Group, a cross-regional group comprising of Barbados, Indonesia, Jordan, New Zealand, Norway, Mexico, Senegal, Singapore, and my own country, Kenya. Excellency, Ms. Bachelet, if elected as the next Secretary General, what will you do to meaningfully restore trust between the Secretariat and member states, the Executive Office of the Secretary General and the rest of the system, and global confidence in the United Nations? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya on behalf of the UNAID Global Group.
Well, thank you for that question. I believe that the best possibility to rebuild confidence is to have a very strong, honest, permanent dialogue with member states. Even with member states that you know when there's no consensus. Because I truly believe that that is really important. That's the only possibility for dialogue and to build trust. Trust can only be built on transparency, on honesty, but also honoring one's values and one's words. This is who I am. This is what I will do. Values are really important as well. But I think one of the important things, but that happens in politics as well, I have to say. People get disappointed of the politicians because they promise things where they're campaigning, and then when they come into office, they will win, they don't see them anymore. And I'm not that kind. I'm a person who wants to do what I have said I'm going to do, because that makes me feel that I'm a person who can be trusted, That's how I am. And also the same with the rest of the system, to work honestly on the issues that you have committed to do to solve different shortcomings and problems, particularly in this very difficult moment for the UN, in terms of financial restrictions and the need, of course, of a reform. But also, in terms of the reform, I think it's really important, I mentioned before, but I would love to mention again because of your question, is that the reform has to be owned and felt owned by member states. It's not something, I mean, of course, the Secretariat has been doing a lot of things that you are going to approve it or not, you're going to discuss many of those issues, but it's the Secretary General's role to implement what's decided by member states. And that's why I believe that we can really work in a very good relationship. But to build respect on the world, I insist, we need to deliver. If the United Nations is seen that doesn't deliver, if the Security Council is seeing deadlock and that doesn't deliver, and you see what's happening in the world, people will not believe in the UN. So I think there's a lot of challenges we need to deal with to be able to ensure, but first deliver at the ground. The second thing that is needed is a very strong field presence of the Secretary General. Many people ask, is it the Secretary or is it a General? Yes, in the Charter it says that the Secretary General should be the Chief Administrator, and that's true. Some say it's the top diplomat in terms that represent the world. That is also needed. But also a general in the sense of being in the field, of working very strongly in prevention, and working very strongly where conflicts arise, but also where we have all kinds of other issues like lack of development and problems with human rights. I feel that it has to be a very present Secretary General.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany on behalf of the group of 4, followed by Uganda and Austria.
Madam President, thank you very much. And Madam Bachelet, Excellency, thank you very much for speaking to us today and presenting your vision. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of 4, consisting of Brazil, India, Japan, and my country, Germany. As the G4 plays a pivotal role in moving forward the reform of the Security Council, my question pertains to that. The Security Council, of course, bears primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, but as its composition does not reflect today's geopolitical realities, the relevance and the effectiveness of the Council are questioned, have been questioned. What role do you foresee for the Secretary General on the question of reform of the Security Council, and what specific initiatives do you intend to maybe take if you are selected? And I would like to add one question in my national capacity. You've spoken about your vision, and you have spoken on UN80 and on the Pact for the Future. I would like to ask you, and also give you the possibility to elaborate a little bit further, of how you see the organization working, on what topics and what priorities, say, over the next 5 years or maybe 10 years, and how you align the vision that has been decided on by member states in the Pact with your vision, and what you think is a priority in terms of making the organization work for those priorities. So what priorities specifically do you have for reform of the organization? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany on behalf of the group of 4. Please, Ms. Bachelet.
Yes. Well, in the Pact of the Future, there was approved the need to a reform of the Security Council. And even though, of course, that is the main role of member states to decide in which direction you go, I think it's a need to think seriously on that reform. So it is better represented what the world is today. So it has the possibility of being more effective, more efficient, and with more representation. I think that can be possible. And that we are able to think also in a better geographical representation. not only numbers of states that can be part of the Security Council, but also from certain regions where they are not part right now as permanent members. And I think that the Secretary General should play a role in terms of, as I said, good offices in terms of talking to member states, talking to the P5, talking to E10, but also to all member states. I mean, I believe that the Secretary General has to have current meetings with the Security Council, with all together, but also separately with the P5, the E10, to try to see if there are certain possibilities of building certain convergences, certain consensus. The Secretary General can try to do his best to produce what I would say political viability for certain changes and for certain reforms. It will not be up to him to make the final decision, or her, but it will be to be able to push in the direction that what the world needs. And the world needs a Security Council that can solve the problems that are on its competence. And right now, it doesn't seem so. So we need to ensure that that happens. On the other hand, on the question of on the UN80, what do I pretend to do in that sense? I think that financial viability is one of the really important issues we have to take care. Of course, make the system more effective, more impactful, accountable, and transparent. One of the things that in my life I've been pushing for, being a minister, being a State Director of UN Women, and being the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and of course being President of the Republic, is that any organization that makes policies, programs, implements them, needs to be a result-oriented organization. When I was a minister, they would give me initiative, activities. And I was always asking, don't give me this. I'm not interested. You have the 100 activities. I know maybe it's 5 activities, but I want to know the outcome, the impact, because what we need is impact and not only numbers of activities that can fill a paper. The same I did with being Executive Director of Human Women and also High Commissioner of Human Rights. The internal report, but also the report for donors, were always about activities. And I always insisted, this is not what we need. We need to know that if what we're doing on the field, or the money we're using in that, is really having the impact that we need. If not, we have to change what we have to do. We need to cut these programs, and we need to do what is really good. So that I would say will be what will be some of my priorities.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement, followed by Austria and Palau.
Madam President, I'm honored to speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM. We welcome the holding of this informal dialogue to exchange views with the candidates of the position of Secretary General of the United Nations. NAM has a series of questions, but to avoid repetition, since we came down the queue, I'll ask a few of those. Number one, how would you promote a more inclusive global governance and ensure the effective consideration of the needs and priorities of developing countries? Number two, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted in 1986 by the United Nations. What is your position on the right to development, and how would you advance its implementation within the United Nations? Number three, how do you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development and fully implement the 2030 Agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such measures, urging their elimination and promoting mechanisms to prevent their application. Next question. Considering the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, I know it has been asked, what measures would you propose to ensure that these principles are reflected in the equitable and effective support to all member state representations in the discharge of their responsibilities? Related to that, which has come also, which was asked, I have 35 seconds, is in terms of the concrete measures you would propose to strengthen multilateralism and international cooperation in the light of their erosion resulting earlier from non-compliance with international obligations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement.
Well, first of all, you remember the Declaration of Right to Development. And I have to say that according to certain decisions, as High Commissioner of Human Rights, it was on my mandate that I had to ensure that the right to development will be respected. So it's not something that I answer just in theory. I had to deal with that. I think we need to address the historical dimension of the right to development. The structural inequalities created by colonial histories require specific remedial action, including in reparative finance frameworks, preferential trade arrangements, and technology access. I think that the Secretary General advocacy on development finance, trade rules, debt restructuring, and technology transfer is explicitly grounded in the right to development, connecting economic policy debates to their human rights foundations. I always have defended the universality, indivisibility, interdependence of all human rights. So I believe all human rights are important rights, from the social, economic, political, civil rights, and of course, the right of, now it has been discussed a couple of years ago, of a healthy environment, and now the right to development. I think we also need to connect the right to development to climate justice. The right of developing countries to pursue their development aspiration while bearing a disproportionate burden of climate impact is a human rights challenge. It's not only an economic and environmental one. And in terms of the unilateral coercive measures, my impression is that the unilateral, the Charter says exactly when you can enforce certain measures and when not. And unilateral coercive measures usually are not in the spirit of the Charter. And the other thing that we all know is that usually unilateral coercive measures affects people, the normal people on the ground. Doesn't affect the ones you're supposed to punish, the ones who are violating rights or so on. And that means that the universal measures, of course, they're not helping to solve the crisis. And many times they're aggravating the humanitarian crisis, affecting more to the more vulnerable. So I think that the international community, through the resolutions of the UNGA and also the Council of Human Rights, have recognized the need to avoid these kind of measures that can be not in the line of the international right and affect the stable development of countries. So I think this is an issue that requires dialogue, requires to understand that there are different sensibilities about it, and also to renovate the commitment with collective solutions that can, if I would say, make the multilateral system more strong.